You know, the 20th century wasn't just about world wars and cool new technology. It was a time that completely, and I mean completely, shattered how we understood reality itself. In this explainer, we're going to dig into how a century of pure chaos led to a revolution in thought. A revolution that, believe it or not, we are still living through right now.
So to really get the 20th century, you have to throw out any idea of steady forward progress. The historian Eric Hobsbawm saw it more like a drama in 3 acts. You have an age of catastrophe, then a short, bright golden age, and finally, everything just collapses back into crisis. It wasn't a straight line at all. It was more like a violent pendulum swing. And that chaotic motion, that is the absolute key to understanding everything that follows.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to stare right into the catastrophes that set the century on fire. Then, we'll look at the old, confident world that just crumbled to dust. From there, we'll explore how art tried to respond. Did it become a safe place to hide or a weapon to fight back? That'll lead us to the single most powerful idea of the entire era, a revolution in how we think about language. And finally, we'll tie it all together and see why any of this matters to you today.
So first up, a century of catastrophe. We really need to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the violence here, because it wasn't just some historical backdrop. It was the engine, the very thing that forced all the change.
And let's be really clear here. The numbers are almost impossible to imagine. Historians call the 20th century the most murderous in all of recorded history, not just from war, but from famine and genocide carried out on an industrial scale. I mean, this level of destruction didn't just break buildings. It broke belief systems. It forced everyone to ask these huge questions. What good is progress if this is where it leads? What does civilization even mean? And what is a human life actually worth?
But, to really understand what was lost, we have to know what was there before. And that brings us to the collapse of the old world. A world that, right before it was torn apart, felt incredibly stable, super confident, and absolutely certain about its own amazing future.
This slide pretty much nails the vibe of the 19th century. Talk about confidence. This was a world built on pillars that felt totally unshakable. Capitalism was king, liberal democracy was the way, and people had this ironclad faith in science and progress. It was a world that saw Europe as the center of the universe, a world that thought it had all the big questions figured out, and, well, it was all about to be blown to pieces.
So how did it happen? Boom, boom, boom. 3 massive shocks, one right after the other. First, you get World War I, which wasn't just a war. Hobsbawm called it the breakdown of civilization itself. Then, just as things were kind of getting back to normal, the Great Depression hits, and that rock-solid capitalist economy, it fails spectacularly. And finally, World War II delivers a second, even more horrific round of global destruction.
The impact wasn't just economic or physical. It was psychological. It created this profound crisis of belief. I mean, how can you believe in reason when the world has gone completely insane? How can you believe in progress when progress gives you machine guns and gas chambers? People started questioning everything, the very foundations of their world, what history means, what a human life is worth. Everything was up for grabs.
So, in a world where all the old answers just evaporated, where did people turn? A lot of them turned to art and literature. But that brought up a huge question, and it's our third section. In a world this broken, should art be a refuge you escape into, or a weapon you use to try and fix it?
And basically, 2 main paths emerge from the rubble. On one side, you have this idea of art as a sanctuary, a perfect, ordered little world you could escape into, where all that matters is its internal beauty and structure. And on the other side, the belief that art must be a weapon, a tool to get your hands dirty, to engage with the world's problems, and to fight for real change.
So if you went down that first path, art as a refuge, you'd find movements like modernism. Writers like T.S. Eliot and Virginia Woolf might not have written directly about the battles, but you can feel the chaos in how they wrote, in their fractured timelines and complex new styles. This path also gave us ideas like new criticism and formalism, which basically said, hey, a poem is a perfect little object. Let's study it on its own, completely separate from history or the author's messy life.
But the second path, art as a weapon, led to totally different places. Marxist critics, for example, would read a novel to see how it secretly revealed the struggles between social classes. Socialist writers used their plays and books as tools to argue for political change. And later on, feminist critics used literature as a way to expose and challenge the power structures of a male-dominated society. For all of them, art was anything but neutral.
Okay, so these 2 paths, refuge and weapon, they seem like they're going in completely opposite directions, right? But what if I told you that most of the thinkers in the 20th century, no matter which side they were on, ended up circling around one single incredibly powerful idea? And this, my friends, is where things get really interesting. This is the revolution of language.
And here it is. This is where those two paths unexpectedly meet. Whether you thought art was a perfect escape or a political tool, your focus was suddenly, intensely, on language. The single biggest intellectual breakthrough of the century was this shared aha moment. Language isn't just a passive tool we use to describe the world, it's the very stuff the world is built out of.
This is the core concept, what people call the turn to language. And the idea is just, it's a mind bender. It says language isn't like a clean window you look through to see a reality that's already out there. No, instead, our reality is actually constructed through language. The words we use, the concepts we have, the stories we tell each other, these things don't just reflect our world, they actively create it.
And once that idea was out there, it just exploded across every field of thought. You had psychoanalysts saying our unconscious minds are structured like a language. You had feminist thinkers showing how gender isn't some biological fact, but a social idea built by words and expectations. Historians started seeing history not as a list of facts, but as a collection of stories, a text that we have to interpret. And then you had philosophers who took it to the extreme, basically saying there's nothing outside of the text. Okay, I know this can all sound a little abstract and academic, but trust me, this intellectual revolution has completely reshaped the world you and I live in right now. So that brings us to our final and maybe most important section. Why on earth does this still matter today?
Well, here's the biggest takeaway. The legacy of the 20th century is that we now understand that our world basically runs on software, and that software is language. Our economies, our politics, our very identities, they're all built on shared stories, on narratives, on big ideas. We are literally living inside these constructions of language every single day, whether we realize it or not.
So it all comes down to this one single idea, the realization that language actively creates our reality. That is the master key to unlocking the last 100 years of Western thought. But it's so much more than an academic concept. It's a survival tool for living in the modern world.
And knowing this, it's a kind of power. Because if our reality is built with language, then we have to become critical of the architecture. We have to question the stories we're being told. We have to analyze the words people are using, and we have to ask, who is building this reality, and who does it benefit?
And that leaves us with one final huge question. The thinkers of the 20th century were trying to tell the story of their catastrophic times. So what's the story of ours? When you look at the world around you right now, what narrative do you see being written, and what part are you going to play in telling it?